Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Vanessa Quick. I'm the Director of Programs and Community Outreach at the National Down Syndrome Society. Welcome to our webinar series. Very, very excited today because we've got the second in our two-part November series on sexuality and Down syndrome and sexuality education. More on that in a second. I'll let everybody know that this is being recorded and will be available on the National Down Syndrome Society's website, www.ndsS.org. So following the webinar, please feel free to refer back to that or share with friends, family, colleagues. This is also the second, as I said, the second in a two-part series from our speakers. We are very pleased to have again with us Jessica Naslund, who is a clinical social worker and sexuality educator based in St. Louis. If you have not heard her presentation on the parent's role in promoting healthy relationships and sexuality for people with Down syndrome, you can check that out on our website, www.ndsS.org. I highly recommend it, but today she's got Crossing the Line, Understanding Boundaries. And so Jessica, we're really eager to hear kind of information you've got to share with us today. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Vanessa. I am really excited to be here also. So today I want to talk a little bit about boundaries. You know, it's one of those words that we often hear about, a tagline, a word in schools and when we're supporting people is, do we know our boundaries? Are we communicating our boundaries? So I want to take the time to really talk about boundaries in terms of understanding how boundaries really can help teach us a lot about social interactions, and how they can also put us at risk if we don't have access to information about appropriate boundaries or if they're not modeled appropriately. So it really is a continuation from last week's conversation about healthy relationships and sexuality, because boundaries are really integral to understanding healthy relationships. If you don't have healthy boundaries, you're not going to have a healthy relationship. So as we continue on this journey, hang on to your seats. There will be some talk of sexuality and boundaries as well. I will be talking about all kinds of different boundaries, but of course, since sexuality is my lens, we're going to relate back to that piece as well. So if you would take us to the next slide. So the objective to today's webinar is that I want you all to become aware of the barriers to education that make people more at risk to be victimized and to perpetrate abuse. It's very important to understand who is supposed to be teaching boundaries, where the boundaries are supposed to be taught, and what they are as well. I want you to understand how a systems approach is a valuable way to reinforce information about social norms. We really need to, we've realized this through learning that a systems approach is really a better way to get the information. So if it's coming at you from all angles of your life, then you're more likely to receive it. And a systems approach is especially helpful for folks who need some more support, folks who have developmental disabilities. So a systems approach. So how can we talk to schools? How do we talk to parents? How do we talk to staff people about how they are talking about boundaries and what boundaries that we're trying to promote in our homes or in our agencies? So I'd also like you to be able to identify tools for teaching and modeling appropriate boundaries. This is why most of you are on the phone call in particular, a way to understand how to do this in a way that is ethical, and also honors both the individual, so myself, and then the other people that are included in terms of comfortable boundaries. Okay, so what are boundaries? So for the purposes of the discussion today, I want us to talk about physical boundaries. What are physical boundaries? Those are touch boundaries. What kinds of touches are okay with which people? And what kinds of touches am I okay with as an individual? Those kinds of physical boundaries are what we're going to be having conversations about today. Verbal boundaries. What is okay to say and what is not okay to say? To which groups of people? So this could be why I can tell somebody in my family about medical issues, and it's not something that I would share with the person that's checking me out at Walgreens. Right? So talking about those kinds of verbal boundaries. And emotional boundaries. So what do we share? And with whom do we share? So this is the idea and concept of trust. So in order to understand what are emotional boundaries, we need to have information about what is trust, what is love, how do I know I'm accepted in this group. So those kinds of emotional boundaries. And then of course, each of those boundaries, physical, verbal, and emotional boundaries, can be something different whether they are in a public arena or in a private arena, right? So if we're in public, what are the appropriate physical touches for family, whereas if we were in private, what would be physical touches that people in romantic relationships would do, right? In terms of verbal boundaries, if we are in public, what kinds of words can we use in public with other people around who can listen? And in private, what kinds of words do we use? And with whom do we use those words? And of course, emotional, public and private, like how much do I share when there are people in the classroom, right? Do I share about all of the drama that I'm having at home in my class, or is that more private information? And so what are those boundaries? And so we'll be talking about some of those today. So where do we learn about boundaries? Well, they come from the same places that lots of things come from. They come from our families. They come from the schools and their interactions with children in schools and professionals. They come through the media. Right? So what shows does your child watch? What kinds of music do they listen to? Is somebody that you're supporting really into certain magazines, right? And each of these different arenas, of course, since they include people, also include information about boundaries. So in our family, we might learn something about using the restroom in private, and that might come from our family. So in our family's home, we make sure that we close the bathroom door. And then we have to go to school and figure out that everyone keeps the bathroom door closed there, right? So we're talking about boundaries across all of these different environments. And each of these environments are letting us know what these boundaries are. We are also learning our boundaries by what is not said. So I talked about this last week in terms of sexuality. So if we don't know our body parts and what they're for, then it will be difficult for us to figure out whether or not we should have more public or private boundaries with those body parts. But if nobody talks about them, if no one says anything about them except for no, don't touch that, or do that in private, then we learn that it is a boundary to not talk about it. that people would be uncomfortable we talk about it, and so that is something to be left more in private. When I'm talking about boundaries, I really want us to be thinking about the reason why we're talking about boundaries is for safety. It does help us be better in relationships, but it is especially important for our safety. Once we understand boundaries, it is very helpful for us to then learn the skills to be able to advocate for those boundaries. Right? So I put this screen up, and I talked a little bit about this last week as well, that in terms of safety, boundaries are very important. And the reason why is because we really have a lack of access to a comprehensive sexuality education program that talks about feelings and talks about boundaries, because many of the ways that we learn about boundaries are through social interactions. And those can be very difficult to teach. They're not very concrete concepts. It's very much about role-playing and what healthy looks like and unhealthy. And so when it comes to teaching boundaries in schools, other than scolding people and letting them know, and then, of course, assigning homework, right, to let them know what their boundaries are. So in the parameters of this class, here's your homework. These are the things that are okay. These are not okay. And most of the time, you don't get a list of rules when your class is set up, right? So, so we're not having any classes about this. It's not in our comprehensive sexuality education programs. Because we don't have comprehensive sexuality education programs. Each state gets to choose for themselves what is appropriate or necessary for their particular state. And not every state has really jumped aboard with this comprehensive sexuality education. But since we're lacking this, we're also lacking education about our feelings about boundaries. The likelihood that someone with a disability will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime is far greater than someone in the general population, neurotypically developing, so to speak. So last week I shared that 83% of women and 61% of men were more likely to, with disabilities, were victims of sexual assault. So if part of understanding how sexual assault occurs or how people perpetrate sexual assault could be going back to understanding boundaries, what is okay, what is not okay, and also helping people to understand and advocate for boundaries, things that they don't want, touches that they don't like. Okay? We talked a little bit about sex trafficking last week as well. Here in St. Louis, we're seeing large amount of sex trafficking, and we're seeing folks with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities be victims in this arena. And so, again, talking about boundaries could help when we talk about what a healthy relationship looks like and what kinds of touches are okay in romantic relationships and what kinds of touches are not okay. And maybe if we had more conversations like that, then people could not be convinced to be in unhealthy relationships where they are potentially trafficked. And of course, more and more as I work in this field, I see individuals with disabilities seeking out help because they have perpetrated abuse, because oftentimes they don't understand boundaries. They have not picked them up through social cues, like maybe people that are neurotypically developing do, through social interactions. And so they can be more likely to boundary violate, right? To violate someone else's boundaries and perpetrate the abuse. which then also really impacts the kinds of services they are offered from here on out, and what kind of reputation this individual now has. So how do we keep people safe? When it comes to boundaries, we educate about boundaries, and we keep open lines of communication so that we can be there for people when they need to ask questions. We can be there listening to them and helping to guide them, whether we're supporting someone as a family member or whether we're supporting someone in a professional capacity. That education and communication is really the basis for understanding boundaries and communicating them. So again, I'm going to set up some of the ways that we talk about boundaries today with this concept of the ring of safety. I tend to go back to this a lot. Dave Hingsberger did a lot of work on this ring of safety, and I'm going to use it to talk about what kinds of boundaries we could be teaching about in each of the different rings of safety. So in terms of sexuality education and boundaries, so what a parent's role in terms of teaching about body parts and those boundaries, I want us to really, I want us to feel more comfortable having conversations about body parts and using correct terms. That is one of the most important things that we can do to help keep people safe. Making up names, nicknames for these parts, people don't take them seriously, right? When we call something a kitty cat or a wee-wee, people are not taking it seriously. It doesn't command the kind of respect that we need when we're talking about our parts and when we're trying to instill a healthy self-concept in those parts. So really using the language and not having boundaries about the language about parts and what they do. A lot of us, that is a boundary for a lot of us. We don't like having that kind of conversation, especially with our children, especially if no one has ever had those kind of conversation with us. And so when I work with people and I talk to them about conversations about masturbation, for instance, I say that none of their parents had this kind of conversation, and oftentimes families and other caregivers are left really drawing a blank as to how to have a conversation about things like self-pleasure when they haven't had conversations with anybody else about that in their life, in terms of a caregiver to a child. So parents can be very uncomfortable with talking about body parts and naming them, but I want us to start doing that at younger and younger ages. This is your arm, this is your leg, this is your penis, this is your bottom, this is your breast, right? So that we're having these conversations. So don't create boundaries around these conversations. The more your child or somebody that you support senses that you are uncomfortable with the topic, the more they write in their mind that that is a boundary. I am not allowed to talk about this particular thing with this person because they're obviously uncomfortable, or they don't like it, or they tell me stop saying that, or I don't want to talk about that, which then doesn't make this person more likely to come back and talk when they have a serious situation about boundary violations. So sexuality education needs to be coming at not necessarily at developmentally appropriate ages, but more in terms of keeping up with their physical development. So keeping up with having these conversations about puberty in the time frame of puberty. So that we are having conversations at 10 or 11 years old that you may be getting erections and ejaculating, or that you may be, you may look in your underwear one day and see some blood and you're not dying, right? so that we're having these conversations. I want us to take away some of the boundaries that we've put up as professionals. If we are supporting somebody, we can be straightforward with this information without giving values, especially when it comes to parts and what they do. So that, I really would like us to think about that. The next is privacy awareness, right? Speaking exactly to what we're talking about today. So this understanding concept of privacy. What is private and what is public? And we say that this is important in teaching boundaries because we need to know what is okay to do when there are other people around and what is not okay to do, right? In terms of the kinds of physical touches. So the best time that we can really start teaching about privacy awareness is from birth on, right? So in our homes, are we modeling appropriate boundaries in terms of privacy? Do we close the door when we go to the bathroom? Do we close the door and are in the privacy of our own bedrooms when we change our clothes? Are we allowed to walk around naked? For some folks, values in their homes are going to be different than other places in other agencies that they'll be involved in. So for instance, let's say you have a child that lives at home with you right now, and they are able to walk naked freely from the bathroom to their bedroom and from their bedroom to their bathroom if they wanted to, and when they're coming back from the shower. Now fast forward, if they've always been allowed to do this in your home, and then they go to live with other roommates, they are going to be under the impression that that is acceptable, that you would be able to walk naked from your room to that room. Right? So when it comes to helping to teach privacy, we start modeling it at home. I want us to be comfortable in our homes. So again, if it is something that your child is able to understand, that in our home we're allowed to walk around without some of our clothes on, but you aren't able to do this in other places, right? If your child is able to understand that, then by all means, go with whatever dress code you can in your home. But for some of our children, some of the people that we are supporting, it is very difficult for them to not generalize this information across the board. So what's okay at home is okay at school, and it's okay in my day program during the summer. So we really need to be thinking about how are we talking about privacy, and then how are we modeling that in our own homes, and then how can we make that consistent in other places. So one of the things that people do in private or public would be to adjust themselves, right? If a breast gets squished in a bra or testicles get squished in the pants, sometimes we need an opportunity to be able to move our body parts out of the way to cause, so that we can be more comfortable, right? So how do we do this in public? Most of the time, if we have an opportunity, we need to do it in private, right? So you go to the bathroom to adjust yourself. But if we are in public, what does that look like? And you can see how this could be something that could put someone at risk if they are comfortable adjusting themselves in public. Then when they start to adjust themselves and become erect, it can make a lot of people uncomfortable. And then it can look like masturbation in public, which then gets flagged as inappropriate or potentially abusive. And then all of a sudden, the people in that environment are angry and frustrated and upset with this person who doesn't understand that what he or she is doing in public is not acceptable. But now they're in all of this trouble, and they now have a reputation. So then it would follow them, you know, next day. So I think about this often when I used to do direct support, in terms of the way information follows someone from day to day, from staff to staff. And so if I have access to read the file of the person that I'm working with for the past month, and I find out that in the course of this month, this person has went outside and urinated in public, has taken their penis out at the McDonald's, and I know all of this stuff about them. So by the time that I am supporting them, it's helpful for me as a direct support staff to know this information about an individual so that I can help to establish boundaries and to anticipate conversations that could be learning experiences for this individual. But it can often be very difficult to unknow the information, so to speak. So once you know that someone has had these kinds of interactions, and you've been able to read their file, or you've been able to read their interactions for the last month, and you know that they're participating in certain kinds of behavior that would not necessarily be acceptable, then you already kind of have this clouded version, and you're already anticipating some kinds of boundary violations, which may or may not be helpful for an individual, right? When you think about whether or not they would be allowed to go to the public pool, for instance. So if I know that they tend to adjust themselves in public and get erections, maybe then I don't send them to the pool, because that is more likely to be an opportunity where there's less fabric in between the person on the, between shorts, swim shorts, and the and their penis, right? So it can really impact. The reputation that the client has, and it can also impact what kinds of services they would be allowed to participate in. So again, privacy awareness, what is public and what is private. We need to be learning this in our homes. We need to be learning this in schools. We need to be using similar language. And we need to be able to live in an environment where we are allowed to say no. Right? That is establishing a boundary, a helpful boundary. If I'm not allowed to say no, then there are more opportunities for me to be taken advantage of, because I won't be used to saying no. I'll be used to saying yes. It's time to go to bed, yes. It's time to take your medicine, yes. It's time to take a shower, yes. Right? So you're used to just going along with whatever someone tells you to do, instead of being able to say, no, can I take that later? Again, in order to help people to advocate for their boundaries, choices are very helpful in teaching people how to advocate. And I need to know what the rules are. I need to know the rules in my house. I need to know the rules in school. I need to know what my rights are, what's acceptable. So all very important pieces. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at a parent's role versus a professional's role. So in terms of teaching boundaries, again, parents' role, it is absolutely necessary for parents to start teaching boundaries before they start getting into the world, right? So we need to start talking about what's okay to say with which people, what kinds of talk is okay, what kinds of dress is okay. Right? We need to be talking about our values when it comes to boundaries. So we don't hug people that haven't earned our hugs, for instance. So a value in our home is that we only hug people that we love or that we really like. So somebody that is a friend or a family member. People earn our hugs. So that would be a value in my home. Right? The rule in social norm is that people give hugs. Some people that are friends give hugs. Some people that are not friends, just people that are friendly, give hugs. But our value in this home is that we only give hugs to people that are our friends or our family. Right? So again, you can see how a parent's role will be different. As a professional, your role is it's even more important to set boundaries. One, because you are, as a professional, you are an outside person to their home environment, and so it can be a lot. It can be a lot easier for you as a professional to teach and get clients or get participants to follow those particular touch boundaries or talk boundaries because you are somebody outside the parent, somebody outside of someone that they see as in power and control. So direct support staff often work side by side and helping to support individuals in recreation and employment. And so this can be great times to really establish what professional boundaries look like. So this could mean, for instance, that you don't give hugs. As a professional in this field, I often see people, especially staff, being uncomfortable with letting someone know that they don't want to hug. Folks with some disabilities have been conditioned that they want to be friendly and they want to be nice, and so the way to be friendly and be nice is to give hugs. This is absolutely true when we think about folks with Down syndrome and in the Down syndrome community, right? That this idea that people with Down syndrome, they really like to give hugs and they're really happy, and it's just a great thing that they give hugs. So they will go to the grocery store and give hugs to somebody walking down the aisle, or give hugs to the person at the cash register. This is not teaching consistent boundaries. So when we allow our child to hug whomever they want out in the community, and we don't guide them with the ideas of trust, you know, in terms of that value, that parent value, who we trust and who we hug. But it is very important in a professional role to make sure that right away you are establishing strict boundaries about touches, especially about touches. So I don't give hugs, I give handshakes and high fives, right? So when we're trying to teach anything, we teach both what is okay and what is not okay. We need to be teaching those side by side. So as a professional, what is okay for me is handshakes, high fives, and fist bumps. What would not be okay is kisses, hugs, or any touches of sexual parts. And the consequence for touching sexual parts or hugging or kissing are this. Right? So as a professional, we also want to think about what the consequences would be if somebody violated these boundaries. And these boundaries are when we consider what boundaries are important, it's both my boundary and your boundary, right? So we're teaching people about feelings oftentimes when we talk about boundaries. When I think about boundaries, the first thing that I think about teaching is feelings, right? How do you know if you violated somebody's boundaries? You usually look at their face or listen to their words. And one of those two things are going to let you know whether or not you violated someone's boundaries. And so feelings are really important in that aspect, being able to read someone's feelings or be able to understand or listen when someone tells you how they feel about it or shows you with their bodies. And so both parents and professionals really need to be thinking about teaching boundaries this way, starting with feelings. This is especially important for people with developmental disabilities because sometimes, as part of their disability, they're unable to read social cues. If they're not able to read social cues, then they do not know when they have violated someone's boundaries. When you violate someone's boundaries, your chance of being hurt in that situation goes up exponentially. So being physically hurt, right? So if you come up into someone's space and they don't like it, they could shove you or hit you or push you. They could give you a dirty look. They could verbally assault you, right? Call you names, scream at you, yell, any of those things, right? So when we're talking about boundaries and when we're teaching about boundaries as parents and professionals, I want us to be teaching about, I want us to start with teaching about feelings, being able to read feelings on people's faces. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So teaching boundaries across the lifespan. So I want us to start teaching about boundaries from the very beginning. In infancy, I want us to talk about the names of body parts. Right? As we're teaching about all of these other parts, as they're learning to process information, I want us to be using these names more fluidly. You know, it's often our own messages that we've received about using these sexual body parts that shame us and keep us away from using them. But it's very important in terms of being able to be safe, to be able to talk about whether or not I'm hurt or whether or not someone has touched me or violated my boundaries. So we really need to know the names of those body parts so we can be clear when we're reporting violence and when we're reporting pain. Right? As the children enter toddlerhood, we need to be talking about privacy, toileting and dressing. Now, for some of the people that we support, they might need help with toileting and dressing for longer periods of time. When we talk about this, I want us to really think about the way we let someone, let me back up. How we teach about privacy should be in each of the environments. So if you have a parent who is involved in the toileting or dressing of their child, do they use gloves? And are the staff supposed to use gloves? Right? So if you have people coming in, right, if you are able to do all of the personal care yourself, I would say that setting up opportunities for them to learn how to do it on them with hand-over-hand guidance would be really helpful, so that you are starting to encourage independence, and encouraging independence also helps you to be able to give them more privacy. So if I can trust them to be able to wipe themselves, then they can have more privacy in the bathroom. If I can trust them to be able to sit on the toilet without moving, then they can have more privacy in the bathroom, right? So that we are encouraging moments of independence when it comes to toileting. And that also, if we do have people outside of our home helping in personal care, that we are doing it all the same way. So if I have a respite worker coming to my house to help me with child care, and they're going to be involved in toileting and or dressing my child, I might ask them to use rubber gloves. And then I also might do that as a parent to let my child know and be consistent, right? Consistency is really the key to teaching boundaries across the board through that systems perspective. So if I'm, as a parent, going to be teaching about privacy and going to be teaching that only people with rubber gloves help you toilet or help you dress, right? Then I'm teaching it at home and I'm using rubber gloves. I'm teaching it to the support staff that come into my home. I'm saying, okay, so we're teaching them about privacy now, and we're also teaching them about who's allowed to touch their parts and who is not. And anybody who's touching their parts needs to use rubber gloves. And they're only allowed to touch their parts whenever they are using the restroom and helping them use the restroom or helping to wash them or bathe them or helping to get their clothes on, right? But rubber gloves might be a way that you can help generalize that to your toddler and on, right, for the whole course of their toileting training or learning how to get dressed, that you could be making sure that you're teaching those boundaries very consistently across the board. Toddler through preteen. Verbal boundaries, physical boundaries, emotional boundaries. So what I want us to concentrate on from the moment we start teaching our children how to speak, we want to be teaching them about advocating for their needs, right? When as toddlers, we talk about family, we've got these family functions coming up. We want our toddlers to be able to choose whether or not they hug our families at these family functions. No child should ever be made to hug or give some kind of physical touch to a family member. They should never be forced to. It takes away their ability to set their boundaries. Right? That is often one of the first ways, besides feeding themselves, that children often set their boundaries is with their families in terms of what kinds of touches that they are okay with. If they say they don't want to hug somebody, don't make them hug them. If they say they don't want to kiss that person, don't make them kiss them. If they don't like kisses on the lips, don't give them kisses on the lips. And make sure everybody knows that. Make sure that other people, if you're advocating for your child or you're advocating for somebody that you're supporting, make sure you're telling other people you should ask him permission. You should ask her permission before you hug. You should say, can I give you a hug first? Or wait for the person to put up their arms to show them through an actual body language that they are ready for a hug. Right? So we're teaching through modeling these verbal boundaries and these physical boundaries as well. We want to be teaching how to advocate for needs and independence. This comes from being able to make your own goals and work towards them. This independence, that's what it comes from. I set goals and I work towards those goals, and I either achieve them or I don't achieve them. But in the course of being able to achieve or not achieve my goals, I create for myself this understanding that I am an independent person. When we go back to that ring of safety, offering choices is very important in helping to help the people that we're supporting advocate for their needs. So we really need to be giving them choices about things that they want. When we can offer choices. When would you like to go to bed? I'm sorry, we don't leave it an open-ended question. You give them choices that you would be comfortable with, and you give them 3 choices, not 2. 2 is an ultimatum. You can either do this or this. That's an ultimatum. 3, you can take your bath now. You can take your bath in 10 minutes, or you can take your bath when this show is over. Right? So I'm giving 3 choices. The more you become comfortable giving choices, the more that also the more comfortable then the person that you're supporting becomes comfortable in choosing. Right? So giving them lots of times, lots of opportunities to make choices so that they can develop and advocate for their needs. Learning how to do that is extremely important. And I would venture to say that it is one of those lifelong lessons to understand how to set these verbal boundaries, to how to advocate for our needs. And when I think about this, I always like to use the model of I feel when this happens, and what I really would like would be this. Right? So depending on how verbal or how much, what kinds of words the person that you support uses, or if they use their words to communicate, then it may be very helpful for you to start teaching this idea that when you are wanting to verbally set your boundaries or let somebody know about your feelings so that they don't cross the boundaries and hurt your feelings, that you always start with I feel. I feel when this happens, and what I really want was this. I feel mad when you turn the TV off, and what I really like is to watch my show for the rest of the time. Right? So you have a child that screams when you turn the show off. This could be an appropriate way to model the conversation that they could have about setting their verbal boundaries. So we need to be giving people choices from the very beginning. During this time, we need to be talking very concretely about physical boundaries. What kinds of touches are okay with which people? One of the best curriculums to teach this is the Circles curriculum. It is a very concrete way to talk about boundaries, especially physical boundaries. You have these, and it's a great way to conceptualize the verbal boundaries we have, also emotional boundaries and trust, because it starts out with this purple private circle in the middle, right? The circle that is just you. This is your body. You're allowed to touch your own body, right? So when we're talking about teaching this as a parent, I might say something like, the purple private circle is the circle that belongs just to you. It's about your body. And in our home, it is okay for you to be able to touch your body parts without your clothes on in your own room or the bathroom with the door shut and no one else around. Right? And if you don't do this, then people could get scared or get mad at you, or you could get in trouble. Right? So this might be a way that you talk about physical boundaries. And then, you know, of course, we talk about the purple private circle and in terms of values. If we are a professional, the purple private circle, your body belongs to you. No one is allowed to touch it but you. You get to choose who touches your body. Right? So a very clear conceptual idea. We need to be giving this to the people we're supporting at a very young age. This body belongs to me. I'm allowed to say yes or no to who touches it. I'm given opportunities to say yes or no when it comes to touches. So, of course, the way the circles works in terms of physical boundaries, what kinds of touches are okay with family. Family, the kinds of touches that would be okay would be kisses, hugs, but be Be specific. Kisses on the cheek, kisses on the forehead, kisses on the lips, kisses with tongue. Which is excuse me, which is acceptable in families. We can even use the Circles curriculum and put up pictures of people. So we put up pictures of family members, then we talk about and we generalize it to what kinds of touches we usually get from them and what's okay with them. And then we create the friend circle, so pictures of this person's friends. Oftentimes we're missing a friend group for folks with disabilities, so we really need to be nurturing that friend group. The more we can get them interacting with their friends, the more likely for more social reprimands in terms of boundaries. So if I hang out with someone and I scream a lot, and they either cover their ears or they try to walk away from me, then I might learn that screaming means that my friends don't want to hang out with me. Right? So creating more opportunities for hanging out with friends. In terms of the Circles curriculum, you can use the friends to be able to talk about what kinds of touches are okay and use their pictures. And then for the professional circle, the same. What kinds of teachers or support staff do they have in their lives? And what would be acceptable touches for them. And whatever you do with the Circles curriculum, as a parent, I would be advocating for this concept to be taught in different realms of their life. So if my child is attending school, I want them to know that we do the Circles curriculum at home and that these are all the people that are in each of their circles, so that the teachers can help to use those as teachable moments in school. Oh, is that how you would touch your friend? Think about your chart at home, right? So the teachers can then use what you're using at home too. This can also be helpful for a leisure program, for instance, where they go out into the community. So the staff would know exactly what kinds of touches are okay in the home and what kinds of touches would be okay out in the community. And they could use the Circle curriculum as well. One of the people that I used to work with before, we would do this. I would go and visit them in their homes. We would use giant sticky notes, and we put pictures of people, and we put touches, and we put circles, and every staff that individual worked with got to see those circles hanging up in their kitchen. And then when school started, every one of the school professionals were able to see what we had worked on there as well. And so both as his educator and his school and his family are all giving him the same messages about what's okay and what's not okay and with whom they're okay, right? And being able to relate it specifically back to the people that we know, people that we hang out with, so that we can generalize that information. And of course, we need to be talking about what some emotional boundaries are. What is trust? So I want us to think about how we behaviorally define trust. Trust is someone that doesn't hurt us on purpose. Trust is we trust someone who doesn't call us names. We trust someone who says what they do and do what they say. Right? So we are talking about how to behaviorally define trust and love to help educate boundaries. What kinds of boundaries are okay in terms of sexual touches and romantic partners and intimate partners? How do you know it's okay to give those kinds of touches? How long should you know somebody? Now, these questions are often left up to the values of the family. So sexual touches are only okay if we've known the person and we're in love with them. Or sexual touches are only okay in private with no one else around. And you can't do it in our home, right? So we're talking about what kinds of physical boundaries are okay. For a lot of people that I support, crossing that line is can be the difference between what kinds of services they get in the future and whatnot. So if they don't understand, if no one's ever talked to them about what kinds of sexual touches and they've only seen it on commercials or their cartoon, or they saw people kissing and then they just went up to someone in the street and kissed them because they saw it in a movie, then they can get in a lot of trouble. So we need to be talking about these boundaries right away. What is love? How do I know if I'm in love? What is abuse? Right? Conversations that weren't necessarily very vocalized to us, so we didn't have these conversations growing up, but we need to be having them with the people that we're supporting. Things that we just picked up from the environment are the people we're supporting are not picking up. So we need to be being very concrete about how we teach boundaries. What kinds of touches are okay, what kinds of talk is okay, what is trust and what is love, so we can figure out our emotional boundaries. Who do we trust this information with? And I would venture to say that this is an ongoing, we all need to do better about teaching boundaries and understand them. And remember, the hardest thing about boundaries is the more we care about somebody, the harder it is to set those boundaries. Okay, so let's go to this last one with teaching tools. Right, so I like music for talking about boundaries and teaching about boundaries. Oh, it sounds like somebody cheated on someone else in that song. Does that sound like it would be a good idea if you were in a romantic relationship? Oh, no, because what happened? Oh, they broke up, and now everybody hates each other. Oh, okay. So music can be a great way to talk about boundaries and establishing boundaries. Taking care of myself has a lot of good social stories and very helpful. Social stories can be very helpful and concrete for folks when understanding boundaries. I want us to remember about boundaries that we be concrete, black and white. We need to be very straightforward about what kinds of touches and consequences. Speaking of consequences, a 5 is against the law, a great way to talk about social boundaries with this rating behaviors as not basically healthy on a scale, on a Likert scale from 1 to 5. And, one being, one of them being against the law and those kinds of things. And of course, there is what's happening to Tom, what's happening to Ellie, so books about puberty. This can be very helpful for people who don't want to have conversations about sexuality or are struggling or don't have access to a lot of information about it. If you help them with a book, or if they're able to read, this might be a great way, or a book that you can read together. Well, I'm going to open up for questions. I'm sorry, I kind of squished us down to the end for questions.
No, please don't be sorry. This has been a fantastic and very, very important presentation. A lot of good stuff to take in there. So for those of you who are out there live right now, we will take a few minutes here to answer some of your questions. So please go ahead and type those into the box on your screen. This is your chance to ask Jessica anything right now, so please do so. So we did get a question here. Hold on, I'm gonna pull it up. Somebody actually texted me personally to ask you, how can I find a crisis professional in my area?
So the first place I want us to look at is what agencies you're already involved with, because they may have connections to your particular crisis intervention teams in your area. You want to go with the agencies that you know and trust the most, that are supporting your child, and then go with their recommendations, because they might actually have people in the community that they're connected with that understand how to work with someone with a disability. Because sexual assault centers are having more and more conversations about folks with disabilities, there are more therapists that are trained on staff to support people with disabilities. I also don't want you to be afraid of asking. Do you have someone that supports people with disabilities? Do you have somebody that would be willing to do pictures as a way to teach or as a way to work through a crisis? So to sum it up, I want us to go to our agencies that we trust, see if they have any connections in the community, and then go to our sexual assault centers and see if they have anybody on staff that has been trained in this particular field.
Great. All right, everybody out there, last chance, type in a question if you've got it. In the meantime, how would you begin working with an older adult with Down syndrome? Where would you start to try to work on boundary issues for somebody who may be a little more set in their ways?
Okay, so I always start with feelings, always, because I want to know their depth of understanding of feelings. So what makes me happy, what makes me mad, what makes me sad, what makes me scared? How do I know when I'm happy, mad, sad, or scared? What does my body look like? What is my body telling me? And then, how do I know if somebody else is happy, mad, sad, or scared? What is their body telling me? So that can be one of the first ways, and sometimes it's just a good way like, oh, what kinds of touches do you give your family? Right? I just want to get an idea about what kinds of touches that you normally give people in your life. Right? If I was working with an older donor, I'd say, in your lifetime, what kinds of touches have you gotten from parents or from siblings, or when we talk about things of that nature. But I always start there with feelings and being able to interpret feelings, because if I don't know how I feel and I don't know how you feel, we're not going to be very good in a relationship together. And I might not even be safe. So always start with feelings, and then what they see for themselves in the future. Open it up for that. And then relate whatever you're trying to teach in terms of boundaries, relate to their future goal. So if their future goal is to find a romantic partner, well, you're not going to, when we talk about these boundaries, this is going to be really helpful for you, because if you know how to touch in healthy ways, then somebody's going to like you better and be more likely to want to be your partner. Or the consequence could be that you won't be able to get that job that you want if we don't start talking about how this goes. This is going to help you in your job, right? You usually don't want to go with the negative thing. You usually want to stay more positive. So this is going to help you with your job. This is going to help you to understand. This is going to help you to make friends. And the consequences are much more real when we're talking with an older adult, especially, especially if they have a lot more independence and freedom in terms of being able to interact with people sexually.
All right, we've got one last question here. It is, my child is 16 and I have not had many conversations with him about boundaries. Is it too late?
I don't think it's ever too late to talk about boundaries, ever. I talk about boundaries even with my own peers, right, which we will continue to do forever. But boundaries can be already finding teachable moments to talk about boundaries. Hey, I see that you're walking around here in your underwear, but you should probably put some more clothes on, right? I noticed that you're itching a lot. Are you having a lot of hair? Right? So that we're already having conversations about what are your needs and what the boundaries are. So it's never too late to start having these conversations about what's okay and what's not okay. And maybe if there's access to an education class or to something that they could be active in so that they can learn more about these kinds of boundaries. I know that oftentimes they're taught in social skills classes, just not as in-depth in terms of sexual touches.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much for this, and I'll remind everybody that we'll post this on our website, ndss.org, so you can check it out later. And And we hope to have more from Jessica in the future on very, very, very important topics to all of us. So everybody, thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.